The room was too bright, too loud, too cold. The antiseptic smell clung to my throat as another contraction ripped through me, stealing my breath. I gripped the metal side rail with one hand, searching blindly for the other, for him, but all I caught was air. "He'll be right back," the nurse said with a practiced smile, adjusting the 4-line. "Just a quick step out. Family emergency." A family emergency. I wanted to ask what could possibly be more urgent than your wife in labor, but the next wave of pain silenced me. My body bore down, every muscle screaming, but my mind was somewhere else, scanning the faces around me, desperate for the one I'd been looking for since I arrived. Another nurse leaned toward the first, whispering not softly enough. "She said she's at St. Mary's," the younger one murmured. "Something about stress pains." He rushed out the minute she called. St. Mary's. Stress pains. Through the haze I knew. It wasn't his mother. It wasn't a sister or some distant cousin. It was her. The name I hadn't heard in years. The ghost I'd been assured was firmly buried in his past. His first love, the one who left him years ago but somehow still lingered in our marriage like a shadow you can't scrub off the wall. A contraction twisted through me, and I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. The nurses kept moving, voices a dull hum, but in my head there was only one sound. The slam of a door I couldn't see, closing somewhere far away from this room. I wanted to believe there was some mistake. That he'd be back any second, apologizing, saying he just had to take a call or grab water. But the clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, and each one carved another notch into my heart. They told me to push. I did. They told me to breathe. I tried. But every breath felt heavier, every push emptier without him there. I had imagined this moment so many times, his hand in mine, his voice telling me I was strong, his tears when he saw our baby for the first time. Instead, my hand clutched the stiff cotton sheet. My voice was swallowed by the shouts of encouragement from strangers. And the first tears to fall weren't his. When the final push came, I felt my body tear and my soul splinter. The cry that followed was sharp and beautiful, slicing through the sterile air. They placed the baby on my chest, warm and trembling, and for a second I forgot the emptiness at my side. I looked down at the tiny face, searching for pieces of us. A mouth shaped like mine, eyes that might be his. But the thought curdled. Those eyes, would they grow up to know the man who left before they took their first breath? The doctor said something about a healthy weight, strong lungs. The nurses cooed and bustled. I kissed the damp forehead pressed against me, willing my love to be enough for both parents in this moment. When they wheeled me to recovery, I asked again if anyone had heard from him. A shrug. A muttered, "He's probably still with her." Still with her. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed on the tray beside my bed. A message, not from him but from a mutual friend. "Don't be mad at him. She had a scare and needed him. You understand, right?" Understand. I stared at the word until it blurred. The baby stirred against my chest, a small whimper escaping. I rocked gently, my hand cupping the tiny head, and realized something cold and certain. The marriage I had carried for years had ended the moment this life began. And the man who should have been here to witness it had already chosen someone else. I met him in my second year of college, the kind of boy who carried both charm and heartbreak in the same smile. Everyone knew he'd been left by his high school sweetheart when she went abroad to find herself. He wore that story like a badge and a wound, and maybe that's why I noticed him, because he looked like someone who needed saving. He didn't pursue me at first. We were just classmates, trading notes, sharing coffee before lectures. But then one night, after a group study session, he walked me home. We stood under the flickering streetlight outside my dorm, and he said, "I thought I'd never feel this again. But with you, it's different." It was the first of many lines that hooked me, reeled me in, and made me believe I was building something lasting. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. I watched him fumble through job interviews, burn dinner in his tiny apartment, and fall asleep at his desk chasing dreams he couldn't yet afford. I lent him money without hesitation, covered his share of the rent when he was between jobs, and never complained when he missed dates because he was working late. When he proposed, it wasn't elaborate. Just us on the balcony of his new place, a cheap ring and the words, "I can't imagine my life without you." I said yes without thinking twice. Marriage felt natural, like the reward for all the patience and loyalty I'd given him. But it also became the place where my sacrifices deepened. We agreed that I would pause my career so he could focus on building his business. Just for a year, he promised. That year turned into 3. I kept the home running. Meals ready, bills paid, laundry folded. While he chased contracts and clients. I learned to read the shifts in his mood, to avoid asking too much when he came home drained. I told myself this was what good wives did. They carried the weight when their husbands couldn't. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would be our turning point. I pictured him holding my hand through appointments, painting the nursery with me, talking to my growing belly late at night. First he seemed excited. He told everyone at work, kissed my stomach, even surprised me with a tiny pair of white booties. But as the months passed, his enthusiasm faded. He missed the 20-week scan, claiming a client emergency. He was late to my prenatal classes, if he came at all. When I suggested we start buying baby furniture together, he brushed it off, saying, "You've got better taste. Just handle it." And so I did. One afternoon, I stood in the middle of the empty nursery with a paintbrush in hand. The soft yellow I'd chosen glowed in the sunlight, but the room felt hollow. I dipped the brush again, humming to fill the silence. Down the hall my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Working late again. Don't wait up." It wasn't unusual. But lately those words felt different, colder, almost rehearsed. Then came the whispers. A friend of a friend mentioned seeing him at lunch with a woman who looked familiar. Another said they'd heard he'd reconnected with an old friend from years back. I laughed it off in public, told myself there was no reason to be suspicious. We were solid. We'd survived too much together to fall apart now. At night, when I lay in bed alone, I convinced myself this was just a phase. Work was stressful, the baby was coming, and maybe he was overwhelmed. A child changes everything, I thought. Surely it would bring us closer. But deep down there was a flicker of doubt I couldn't smother. A quiet voice that whispered while I painted the nursery alone, while I sat through appointments with an empty chair beside me, while his phone lit up with messages he didn't explain. I loved him more than I loved myself. And I thought that would be enough. I didn't know then that love, when it's one-sided, can become the very rope someone uses to walk away from you. 2 weeks after giving birth, my body was still aching, stitched, and heavy with exhaustion. Nights bled into days. I measured time not by clocks but by the baby's feeding cries. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the bedroom, the bassinet beside me, and the lingering silence where his presence should have been. That morning I sat propped up with pillows, scrolling mindlessly while the baby dozed against my chest. That's when the image stopped me cold. It was on a local events page, one of those candid shots taken outside a hospital entrance. Him. Her. They were standing close, her hand looped through his arm like it had always belonged there. They were smiling, not polite pose smiles but the kind of smiles you can't fake. She looked fragile in a pale coat, clutching a bouquet. His other hand was over hers, as if shielding her from the world. The caption read, "Old friends reunite during a difficult time." My fingers went numb. My pulse roared in my ears. An hour later, my phone lit up with a message from a friend I hadn't heard from in months. "I don't want to get in the middle, but you should know. He stayed at her place that night you went into labor. Said you were in good hands." I stared at the text until the words blurred, the baby stirring restlessly as my breath hitched. I told myself 1,000 excuses for his absence that day, but this was the first one that left no room for hope. When he came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the printed photo in front of me. "Where were you?" My voice was steady, too steady. He glanced at the picture, then at me, his expression sliding into something infuriatingly calm. "Is this what you've been doing all day? Digging for drama?" "I'm asking a question," I said. He pulled off his coat, draping it over a chair. She had a health scare. Stress pains. I was the only one she could call. What was I supposed to do, ignore her? "You were supposed to be with your wife. Your newborn child." He sighed, as if I were a slow student missing the obvious. "You're hormonal. You're not thinking straight. This isn't about choosing her over you. It's about being a decent human being." The way he said decent made it sound like I was the one failing some moral test. For a moment I almost let it go. Almost swallowed my questions like I had so many times before. But then I saw the photo again in my mind, the way they fit together, the ease between them. That wasn't a one-time reunion. That was comfort built on history. Days later, while paying bills online, I noticed something strange. Large, regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. The name on the account was hers. The amounts weren't small. They were enough to cover rent, groceries, whatever else she needed. My stomach turned. While I stretched every dollar for diapers and formula, he was building her a cushion. I thought of the hospital bouquet in the picture. I thought of the way his hand rested over hers, protective, claiming. It clicked then, this wasn't just nostalgia or kindness. This was a plan. My stability was his cover, my name on the mortgage his safety net. She was his future, waiting in the wings, already being funded. That night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep when he came in, phone pressed to his ear. Just a matter of time, he was saying, voice low. Once the papers are signed, I'm free. Free. The word lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. He thought he was planning his freedom. He had no idea he'd already freed me. I was sitting on the couch, the baby latched to me, half asleep in the hazy rhythm of nursing when the knock came. It wasn't the soft, uncertain tap of a neighbor. It was firm, deliberate. When I opened the door, he was standing there in a pressed shirt, holding a manila envelope like it weighed nothing. I think this is best, he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. Inside the envelope were divorce papers. I stared at them, then at him. You couldn't even wait until I'd finished feeding your child? He glanced at the bundle in my arms, his jaw tightening. You deserve someone who's fully here. I can't give that to you. It sounded like a confession, but his eyes were dry. I wanted to ask when he'd decided this. Was it during the pregnancy? The day of the birth? Or was it always part of the plan? But I knew the answer wouldn't matter. He'd already packed his bags and his conscience. By the end of the week, he'd moved in with her. His first love. The woman who had needed him in my delivery room. I saw the photos online, her head on his shoulder, the caption full of words like meant to be and finally home. Friends didn't know what to do with the mess of it. Some offered sympathy in private but stayed neutral in public. Others suggested I should be grateful. He was being honest now rather than years later. My in-laws said nothing at all. The silence from them was its own betrayal. The days blurred. Feed the baby. Change the baby. Rock the baby until my arms ached. Between the physical exhaustion and the bills stacking up on the kitchen counter, the weight was crushing. I'd wake in the middle of the night to the baby's cries, feeling like I was underwater, moving through thick, dark currents I couldn't escape. Postpartum depression wrapped around me like a wet, heavy blanket. I went through the motions, sterilizing bottles, folding tiny onesies, but inside I felt hollow. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Then came the wedding. It was his cousin, someone I'd grown close to over the years. The invitation had arrived before the birth, addressed to both of us. I tucked it into a drawer, thinking it would be nice to dress up, see family, maybe feel normal for a few hours. A week before the event, a message came from the bride herself. She said she was so sorry, but it might be better if I didn't come. It would cause tension since my ex would be there with his partner. Partner. Not mistress. Not the woman who broke her vows to sisterhood and decency. Just partner. I typed and deleted responses for an hour before finally settling on nothing at all. Silence felt safer than screaming. Then one rainy night the baby developed a fever. It started small. A warm forehead, restless sleep. By midnight, he was burning up and crying in sharp, desperate wails that pierced through my bones. I called the pediatrician's after-hours line, my voice trembling as I answered questions about his breathing, his feeding, his behavior. They said to monitor him closely, to bring him in if it worsened. I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor, the baby in my arms, my hair damp from sweat and tears. My heart pounded with every sob from his tiny body. My hands shook as I rocked him, whispering nonsense through my own ragged breaths. And then the words slipped out before I could stop them. I can't do this. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It was barely more than a whisper, swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator and the patter of rain against the window. But it was the truest thing I'd said in months. I pressed my cheek to his hot little head, tears running freely now. I wanted to be strong for him, to be enough for both of us. But in that moment, I was just a woman on a kitchen floor, with nothing left in her but the will to keep breathing until morning came. The first time she knocked, I almost didn't open the door. I'd been avoiding everyone, especially anyone tied to him. But when I peered through the peephole and saw her standing there, his mother, clutching a foil-covered dish and wearing that familiar floral scarf, I froze. "I thought you could use a hot meal," she said when I finally opened it. Her voice was soft, almost careful, as if she expected me to slam the door. I didn't invite her in, but she stepped over the threshold anyway, heading straight for the kitchen like she still lived here. She set the dish down, pulled off her gloves, and turned to look at me. "I don't agree with what my son did." The words hit harder than I expected. I'd been bracing for awkward sympathy or polite small talk, but not that. "I won't pretend I understand him," she continued. "But I understand you need help." First it was little things. She'd stop by once or twice a week to hold the baby so I could shower. She'd drop off groceries or fold laundry while I napped. She never lingered too long, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. One afternoon, while the baby slept in her arms, she glanced at the pile of unopened bills on the counter. "You're going to need more than casseroles to get through this," she said gently. "What did you love doing before all this?" The answer came out without thought. "Photography." Her eyes lit up. "You still have your camera?" It had been shoved in a box at the back of my closet, gathering dust. She insisted I dig it out, and when I did, she smiled like she just handed me back a missing piece of myself. A week later, she introduced me to a friend of hers who ran a local women's business group. The first meeting, I sat in the back, feeling out of place among women in tailored blazers talking about marketing strategies and client rosters. But when it was my turn to speak, I mentioned my photography, how I used to do portraits in small events. By the end of the meeting, 2 women had asked for my rates. It was terrifying at first, hauling my camera bag out again, adjusting the straps with hands that felt clumsy from disuse. But once I started shooting, something shifted. The click of the shutter, the framing of light, it was muscle memory, but also something deeper. The first paycheck wasn't much, but it felt heavier than any sum I'd ever received. It was mine, earned without his name attached. Slowly I began to change. I stopped throwing on the same stretched-out sweater every morning. I started putting on mascara again, not for anyone else, but because it made me feel awake. I laughed more real laughs, the kind that come from the belly, usually when the baby did something ridiculous like try to eat his own foot. My ex-mother-in-law kept showing up, always in small, steady ways. She babysat when I booked a shoot. She clapped when I showed her my work. She never spoke ill of her son, but the way she looked at me said everything. She saw what he'd thrown away. One afternoon, as I was filling out paperwork for a new client, I came across my legal name at the top of the form, his last name. It looked wrong. Felt like a label I no longer wore. The next morning, I took the baby and went to the courthouse. The clerk asked me if I was sure. I told her I'd never been more certain. When I signed my maiden name again, it was like unlocking a door I'd closed years ago. I walked out into the crisp air with my son on my hip, the new papers in my bag, and the quiet knowledge that I was no longer just surviving. I was reclaiming myself piece by piece. The first time I saw my name in print, it was in the corner of a glossy magazine spread, 3 photographs I'd taken for a charity gala. It wasn't a cover story, not even a full page, but it was mine. Over the years, those small features turned into full articles, interviews, and invitations to events I never imagined I'd attend. My photography business grew, first locally, then across state lines. I wasn't just that woman who'd been left. I was a professional with a reputation for capturing moments in a way that made people feel seen. When I bought my own house, I stood in the empty living room and let the silence settle. No one's name was on the deed but mine. Every wall, every floorboard, every key was paid for with my work. I hung my son's drawings on the fridge, my framed photos on the walls, and filled the place with light, real light, from windows I could throw open whenever I wanted. Meanwhile, his name surfaced in conversations I didn't seek. Whispers of failed business investments, lawsuits, and a string of bad deals followed him. His once polished image dulled with every passing year. Then there were the rumors about her, the woman he'd chosen over me. I heard she'd been seen with someone else, younger, wealthier. That she'd drained his accounts just as his ventures began to crumble. I didn't seek out the details, but they found me anyway, carried on the wind of a town that never forgets. I kept my distance. Not out of fear but out of choice. His downfall was none of my doing. It was the weight of his own decisions dragging him under. I didn't need to watch him sink. Then came the invitation. A women's empowerment event, hosted in the very building where he'd once celebrated our engagement. Champagne glasses clinking under chandeliers I used to love. I held the thick, cream-colored envelope in my hands for a long time before opening it. It wasn't lost on me, the symmetry of it all. Years ago, I'd stood in that same room in a pale blue dress, believing I was stepping into a life of stability and love. Now I was being asked to stand there again, not as someone's fiancé, but as the keynote speaker. The night of the event, I walked into the building with my head high. The chandeliers were still there, casting that familiar warm glow, but everything felt different. My heels clicked against the marble floors with a rhythm that was entirely my own. I took my place on stage, the microphone cool in my hand. The audience quieted. When life breaks you, I began. It doesn't send a warning first. It doesn't wait until you're ready. Sometimes it hits you in the very moment you thought you were the safest. And in that moment you have a choice. Stay broken or build yourself again, stronger than before. The words rolled out of me, not rehearsed but lived. I spoke about loss, not just of love but of the self you once knew. I spoke about rebuilding from nothing, about finding purpose when the future you planned has been burned to ash. I never named him, never told my personal details, but for those who knew the story, every line was a blade, clean and deliberate. I learned, I said, that survival isn't about avoiding the storms. It's about planting yourself so firmly that no wind can uproot you. And if you've lost everything, then you've been given the rarest gift, the chance to decide who you will become next. As I spoke, my eyes swept over the crowd, catching familiar faces, people who'd been there the night of my engagement party. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few couldn't meet my gaze. And then at the very back, just for a moment I thought I saw him. I didn't pause. Didn't give him the satisfaction of acknowledgement. My voice stayed steady, my hands calm. When you realize that the only approval you need is your own, I continued, you stop living for someone else's version of your worth. You start living for yourself. And that is the moment you truly rise. The applause that followed was thunderous, but I didn't measure my victory by the clapping. I measured it by the quiet strength I felt in my chest as I stepped off the stage, knowing that the woman who had once stood there in naive hope was long gone. Outside, the air was cool, and the city lights shimmered against the night sky. I walked away from that building without looking back, knowing that whatever he saw, whatever he felt, if he was even there, was his to carry. I had already laid my burdens down years ago. I was rearranging a new display near the front of my store when I saw the reflection in the glass. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The man standing outside looked like a shadow of the person I once knew, thinner, shoulders slumped, hair grayer at the edges. But the moment he stepped inside, the air changed. Conversations quieted. My staff exchanged glances, sensing the tension even before a word was spoken. He stood there for a moment, his eyes scanning the space as if trying to absorb every detail, or maybe just buying himself time. Finally, his gaze landed on me. "You look different," he said, his voice low, uncertain. I didn't offer him a seat. I didn't even put down the vase I was arranging. "It's been years," I replied evenly. "People change." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I know I have no right to be here, but I didn't know where else to go." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think this is the place?" His words came in a rush. "She left me. The one I—" He stopped, catching himself, then tried again. "The woman I thought I loved, she's gone. Took everything. Every last cent I had left. I'm broke. Alone. And I can't stop thinking about you. About us." I almost laughed, but the sound stuck in my throat. "Now you remember us? I made mistakes," he said quickly, stepping closer. "Big ones. I see that now. I thought I was chasing happiness, but it was all a lie. You were the one. You always were." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the desperation in his eyes. The old me would have felt that pang of sympathy, that pull to comfort him. But the old me didn't exist anymore. I set the vase down gently and turned to face him fully. "Do you remember the night I gave birth?" His face went still. "Of course I." "Do you remember where you were?" I cut in. "Because I do. I remember lying in that hospital bed, holding our newborn while you were across town with her. I remember the nurse asking if I wanted someone to call my husband, and I had to pretend you were on your way. I remember the way my chest hurt more than the stitches because you weren't there. He looked down at the floor. I was stupid. I was. You were selfish, I said, my voice steady but sharp. You left me when I needed you most. And every tear, every sleepless night, every bill I paid alone, I carried it without you. He stepped forward again, lowering his voice like he thought it would make me listen harder. We could start over. I've changed. I could make it right this time. The absurdity of it almost made me smile. Start over. I shook my head slowly. You're not asking for a second chance. You're asking for a rescue. And I'm not in the business of saving men who watched me drown. A silence stretched between us, heavy and unyielding. Behind me I could feel the eyes of my staff, my clients. Some pretended to browse, but their attention was fixed on us. I took a breath not because I was unsure, but because I wanted my words to land exactly where they should. You left me where I was. And now I'm leaving you where you are. His mouth opened like he wanted to argue, to plead, but nothing came out. I turned and walked toward the back, my heels clicking against the polished floor. I didn't look back, not once. Every step felt like closing a door I'd been holding open for far too long. When I reached my office, I shut the door softly, not out of mercy but out of finality. In the quiet that followed, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't even about him anymore. It was about me, and the fact that I no longer needed anything he could offer. Out front, life moved on. My staff returned to work, my clients kept shopping, and the world didn't pause for his regret. Neither did I. It was late afternoon, the kind of soft golden light that made the living room feel warmer than it was. My son sat on the floor, surrounded by a fortress of building blocks, humming a tune only he understood. I was looking for an old photo album in the bottom drawer of my desk when my fingers brushed against something folded, creased and fragile with age. It was the envelope, yellowed at the edges, my own handwriting faint but still unmistakable. I didn't have to open it to remember what it was. The letter I had written during those long hollow nights after he left. The one I had never sent. For a moment I just held it, my thumb tracing the uneven lines of my own desperation. My chest tightened, not with grief but with a strange, almost reverent curiosity. I pulled it open, the paper whispering against itself, and began to read. The words hit me like a ghost from another life. Please come home. I can't do this alone. I'm scared. The baby needs you. I need you. My handwriting had been frantic, some words smudged as if I'd cried onto the page. I promise I'll forgive everything if you just walk through the door. I'll pretend none of it happened. Just come back. I could almost see myself as I was then. Hair unwashed, body aching from childbirth, heart fractured in too many places to count. I had believed every word I wrote. I had been ready to hand him all the pieces of myself just so I wouldn't have to be alone. But now those words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else entirely. I set the paper down on my lap and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. There was no shame, no lingering ache. Only gratitude. Gratitude that this plea, this surrender, had never reached him. Gratitude that I had been forced to face the silence and in doing so, had learned to live without his voice filling it. My son giggled from across the room, holding up a wobbly tower of blocks as if it were a skyscraper. Look, Mama, he called. I see it, sweetheart, I said, my voice soft but steady. I rose, letter in hand, and walked to the fireplace. The fire was low, just embers and the faint crackle of wood settling. I held the paper above the flame, watching as the heat curled its edges inward. The ink darkened, then blurred, then vanished entirely. The smoke rose in a slow spiral, carrying the last trace of that woman I had been. The one who thought she couldn't survive without him. I watched until there was nothing left but a small heap of ash, gray and weightless. Behind me, my son clapped as his tower collapsed, delighted in the mess. I smiled, the warmth in my chest spreading deeper than the fire's glow. That's when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I reached for it without urgency, glancing at the screen. An email notification. I tapped it open, scanning the first lines. A national brand. They'd seen my work. They wanted to collaborate. The words blurred for a moment, but this time it wasn't because of tears. It was because I was smiling too wide to focus. I looked over at my son, who was already rebuilding his tower, undeterred by the fall. "We did it," I whispered. I set the phone down, letting the reality settle in. This was the life I had built. Not from pleas or second chances, but from the quiet, steady work of standing back up. From every night I stayed awake with him, from every risk I took, from every refusal to look back when it would have been easier than moving forward. I glanced at the fireplace one last time. The ashes were still there, but they meant nothing now. Then I turned toward my son, the future, and the door we had already walked through.